Wyoming Territory, September 1882. The rain came down in sheets, cold and mean, as if the mountains themselves were angry. Victor Rhodes pulled his horse to a stop at the crest of a ridge, water dripping from the brim of his hat, his coat soaked through. The wind howled over the rocks and pine, but it was not the weather that made him pause, it was the figure on the trail below. She stood alone, wrapped in nothing but a dress too light for the season, her hair plastered to her face. Her shoulders trembled, but she did not move. Not even when lightning cracked behind her, lighting up the soaked earth around her boots. Victor's heart thudded. What in God's name? He kicked his boot against his horse's side and rode down fast, gravel flying under the hooves. As he neared, he saw her eyes wide, glassy, like she had not blinked in hours. She looked young, maybe his age, no more than 25. Her lips were blue. "Miss," Victor called, pulling his horse to a halt beside her. "You out here on your own?" She looked up at him, slow and dazed. Her voice cracked when she answered. I did not know where else to go." Victor dismounted, the mud pulling at his boots. He took off his coat and stepped close, wrapping it around her shoulders. She flinched at first, but then her fingers gripped the lapels tight. "You are freezing," he said, gentler now. "You got a name?" She nodded, but did not speak. "What is it, Faye?" she whispered. "Faye Sutton." He looked at her, really looked. Her cheeks were raw from the wind, her hands had scrapes, dirt under the nails, her dress was torn at the hem. Victor's jaw tightened. "You running from someone?" Faye looked up at him with eyes that held more pain than any stranger's should. "He took everything. My father's land, my brother's horse, and he was going to take me too. I ran. I did not look back." Victor's fists clenched at his sides. He had seen what men like that did, men with money, power, no decency, but he kept his voice calm. "All right. You are safe now, you hear me?" He turned, leading his horse with one hand while keeping the other on Faye's back. "Come on. My cabin's not far." She followed without a word, her steps slow but steady. The cabin sat tucked into a grove of aspen trees, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, the fire was already burning from when Victor had left earlier to check on his cattle. He helped her inside and shut the storm out behind them. Faye stood near the hearth, her wet dress clinging to her legs. Victor tossed a blanket toward her. "You change out of that," he said, turning to give her privacy. "There are dry clothes in that trunk. They will be big on you, but warm." She hesitated, then moved to the trunk. Victor stayed turned away, staring at the flames, jaw tight. When she cleared her throat, he looked back. She wore one of his shirts, the sleeves rolled, a belt cinched around her waist. Her hair was drying in waves, and her skin was warming to a soft pink. "Thank you," she said, voice steadier now. Victor nodded. "Sit. I will get you something hot." By the time she had finished a bowl of stew and some bread, the color had come back to her cheeks. She sat curled in a blanket, watching him. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yeah, came out 5 years ago, after the war." He looked over at her. "You from around here, south of Cheyenne?" "Or I was." Victor sat across from her, hands cupped around his coffee. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. "I can ride you into town tomorrow if you want," he offered. "Sheriff there is decent." Faye looked down. "He is the one I ran from." Victor's brow furrowed. "The sheriff," she nodded. "He knew my father owed money. He let the man come take what he wanted, even me." Victor's mouth went dry. He had heard of such things. In smaller towns, law was often just another man with a badge. "Well," he said, voice low with something darker now, "you are not going back." Faye looked up again. Her eyes were soft but sure. "I would not have anywhere to go even if I did." "Yes, you do." Victor stood and walked over to her. He took the coat she still wore like armor and pulled it tighter around her shoulders. "You are here now, that means something." She blinked, breathing uneven. "You do not know me." "I know enough. You stood out there in the storm and did not break. That tells me more than 100 words." Faye's eyes searched his, something unspoken passing between them. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek with a knuckle, slow and careful. "You are not alone anymore." A tear slid down her cheek. She gave a shaky nod, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Victor." He looked at her like he had not looked at anyone in years. "I found you in that storm, Faye, and I am not letting you go." Her breath caught. He wrapped his coat tighter around her and whispered, "You are my wife now." Faye blinked, her lips parting in surprise, but she did not pull away, her voice trembled. "All right." His hand stayed on her cheek and she leaned into it. Neither of them said another word. But in the silence, something settled between them, solid and real. And outside, the storm finally began to pass. The sun rose slow the next morning, drawing long bands of gold across the cabin floor. Victor had been up before it, feeding the fire and tending to the saddle sore on his mare's leg. He moved quiet, careful not to wake her. But when he returned from the lean-to with a bucket of water, he found her sitting at the table, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, fingers curled around a tin cup. She didn't speak right away. Just watched the steam rise from the cup, her shoulders held stiff like she was still waiting for something to go wrong. "You sleep all right?" he asked, setting the water down near the hearth. Faye nodded once. "Better than I expected." He crossed the room, pulling bread from the cupboard. "There's honey if you want it. Came from a man up near Laramie. Keeps bees in the hills." She took the jar from him without meeting his gaze. "Thank you." The silence wasn't heavy, just quiet enough to notice the wind had eased outside and a bird was calling from somewhere in the trees. Victor sat across from her, tearing a piece of bread in half. "You ever work stock?" She blinked at him. "Stock, cattle, fence mending, that sort?" "Not exactly." She tilted her head. "Why?" He shrugged. "Got a few head, nothing fancy, but they need watching." "You're welcome to stay, but I won't lie to you, it's not a lazy life." "I don't need rest," she said, voice firmer than it had been the night before. "I need a place where no one owns me." Victor's eyes flicked to hers. "Ain't nobody going to lay a claim on you here, Faye, not now." "Not ever." She held his gaze for a moment, then looked down and tore off a piece of bread. "I know how to ride," she said, "and I've mended a fence or two. My brother taught me." He didn't ask about the brother. She hadn't spoken his name, and Victor figured she would when she was ready. "I'll show you the pasture after breakfast," he said instead. "And the spring. There's a path behind the shed, you can wash if you want." Her hands stilled. "I'd like that." They ate without much else said, but the air between them had changed. Not warm, not yet, but no longer wary. Later, she followed him through the trees, boots sinking into soft earth. The land opened wide beyond the rise, rolling hills, a split-rail fence running jagged along the edge. 3 chestnuts grazed near a stone outcrop, tails flicking lazily. Faye leaned against the post and took it all in. "You did this alone, most of it." He pointed to the far side. "That corner floods in spring. I'll show you how to shore it up before the snow comes." She didn't answer right away. Then, "Why did you call me your wife?" Victor didn't shift his weight or drop his eyes. "Because I needed that man, whoever he was, to be wrong about you, about what you're worth, and because I meant it." She turned toward him slowly. "You don't even know me." "I know what I saw. You didn't beg. You didn't fold. You walked into that storm alone and you kept going." Her voice caught. "I was scared." "Doesn't mean you weren't brave." Faye looked away, blinking fast. "I'm not used to someone meaning what they say." "Well," he said, "get used to it." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, more like a sound she hadn't let herself make in some time. "What now?" "Now we mend fence." He handed her a pair of gloves too big for her hands. "And after that you can show me how to saddle your brother's horse once we get one under you." She held up her hands in protest. "You don't have to give me anything." "I'm not," he said. "You'll earn it." But that doesn't mean I won't help. Faye studied him, then nodded once. All right. They worked until the sun crested high, hands raw and shirts damp with sweat. She didn't complain when the wire bit her palm or when the post wouldn't set right. He didn't praise her either, just handed her the next tool, the next task. And she met it all with a quiet steadiness that caught him off guard. When they stopped to drink from the spring, she sat beside him on the grass, arms resting on her knees. The sky stretched wide above them, not a cloud in sight. I didn't think I'd be alive today, she said after a while. I thought maybe the cold would take me. He didn't answer at once, just looked out over the land. You're not dead, that counts for something. She turned her face toward him. You don't ask for much, do you? No, he said. I've found most things worth keeping don't come loud. She was quiet then. And when the breeze lifted her hair, she didn't smooth it down. She let it move. He watched her for a moment, then stood, reached out a hand. She took it without hesitation. And together, they walked back toward the cabin, neither of them saying what they both knew. Something had shifted. Not all at once, but steady as a fire catching in dry pine. The days shortened quick as October settled in, and the air turned sharp enough at dawn to sting the lungs. Victor rose early each morning, splitting wood before the sun crested the ridge, and Faye came to the yard without needing to be asked, pulling on his spare boots and tying her hair back with a strip torn from an old feed sack. They'd fallen into a rhythm, quiet, unspoken, but steady. She took to feeding the hens and keeping the hearth stoked, while he rode the southern pasture or patched the roof before snow could rot the shingles. One afternoon, as light slanted low and golden across the grass, Faye stood at the edge of the corral, watching as Victor trained a young bay to take the saddle. The colt danced sideways, nostrils flaring, but Victor moved slow, steady hands and low voice, until the animal stilled under him like it had known him all its life. "You ever break a horse before?" she asked as he swung down and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Plenty," he said, looping the reins over the post, "but none that listened like this one. He trusts you." Victor set the saddle aside. "Takes time for most of him." She rested her hands on the fence rail. "You always this patient?" "Not always," he said. "Used to be quick to temper. Army did that. Lost more than I gained from it." Faye looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. "You don't talk much about what came before," he shrugged. "Not much to say that'd make anything better now." She didn't push. "Instead," she said, "my brother used to talk to the horses like they were people. Mama said he was born soft-hearted. Sounds like he knew something most folks forget." The wind blew dry through the cottonwoods, scattering brittle leaves across the yard. Faye watched them fall for a moment, then picked up a bridle from where it hung near the gate. "Can I try?" she asked, motioning toward the colt. Victor nodded. "He's calm, but new to hands other than mine. Move slow." She entered the corral careful, not timid, and waited until the colt turned his head toward her. She let him sniff her palm before raising the bridle. Her movements were gentle, unhurried, and when the bit slid into place, she pressed her forehead to his neck. Victor leaned on the rail, watching her without speaking. When she stepped back, the colt followed. "You've got touch," he said. She smiled, not proud, just quiet. "Sometimes I think they're the only ones who ever listened." "They're honest, at least," he said. "You give 'em fear, they give it back. Give 'em peace, they settle." Faye ran her hand down the colt's shoulder. "I never had peace, not once." "You will," Victor said. "Not all at once, but it'll come." That night after supper, Faye sat by the fire mending a tear in the sleeve of her dress. Victor finished cleaning his rifle, setting it back on the rack above the door before lowering himself into the chair across from her. "Would it trouble you?" she asked, not looking up. "If I stayed through winter?" He studied her face, the way her brow furrowed just slightly when she focused. "No," he said. "I hoped you would." She drew the needle through in a neat line. "I can't offer much." "You're offering more than you think," he said. She glanced at him then, eyes catching the firelight. "What if I don't know how to be with someone long-term? I've only ever been told who to be." "You don't have to be anything but yourself," Victor said. "This place, this life, it's not about what anyone expects. It's about building something that holds." Faye set down the fabric and rubbed her thumb over the worn edge. "I want to belong somewhere." "You do," he said. "Right here." She stood and crossed the room, stopping in front of him. Her hands were still, but her voice was steady. "If I say I want to stay and make a life with you, not just for shelter, but for something more, you'd want that." He rose slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "I already do." Faye reached for his hand, and he met hers without hesitation. There was no ceremony, no declaration, just the weight of shared truth settling between them. Outside, the first frost of the season dusted the grass silver. Inside, warmth held. By early November, the wind carried the weight of snow in it. The days folded into one another, each colder than the last, and the ground hardened beneath their boots. Victor had taken to chopping extra wood before dusk, stacking it tight near the cabin wall. Faye lined the windows with wool scraps and stitched flour sacks into draft cloths. Neither of them spoke much about the coming winter, but it was there in the way they moved, deliberate, preparing. One morning, after the frost had lifted but before the sun had fully burned through the mist, Faye walked out to the shed and found Victor bent over a broken bridle strap, the leather stiff and cracked in his hands. "Have you any rawhide left?" she asked, crouching beside him. He nodded toward a crate behind the workbench. "Bottom corner, needs soaking first." She pulled the strip free and set it in the bucket, then leaned her back against the wall. "You ever think of moving closer to town?" "No," he answered, not looking up. "Too many voices stacked on top of each other. I was always better with quiet." "You ever get lonely out here?" His stitching paused for a breath. "Not anymore." Faye looked at her hands, dry from the cold and speckled with sap. "I used to think I'd end up in a boarding house kitchen, or married off to someone who needed a cook and a warm bed more than a wife." Victor set the bridle aside and wiped his palms on his trousers. "That what you thought you were worth?" "It's what I was told." She didn't soften the words. "Often." He stood and poured water from the kettle into a basin, then dipped a rag and handed it to her. "Let me show you something." She followed him behind the shed, where the slope dropped gently to a narrow draw. A small wooden cross stood near a cottonwood, the bark weathered pale. Around it, dry stalks of wild yarrow leaned with the wind. "Was this someone you lost?" she asked. Victor nodded. "Name was Francis, scout in my company. He couldn't read, but he'd memorized whole passages from the good book. Spoke them back like music." "What happened?" "We were crossing the Cimarron. Flood came sudden. He gave up his horse to a boy swept off his feet, lost his footing. We pulled him out, but his lungs were gone by nightfall." She reached down and touched one of the stalks. "You buried him here," he asked me to. Said it was the only land that ever felt honest under his boots. Faye stood in silence for a long moment. "You keep promises." Victor looked at her, his eyes steady. "I try." They walked back without speaking. The air between them changed again, but not in a way either of them needed to name. That evening, Faye sat at the loom beside the fire, weaving strips of wool into a narrow rug. Victor watched the pattern form a simple design, dark thread against cream, no flourishes, just clean lines repeating. "You ever think about having a child?" she asked, running her fingers along the weft. He rested his hand on his knee. "Sometimes. But I never thought I'd have someone to raise one with." Faye didn't answer right away. "I used to imagine a little girl, brown hair, eyes like my brother's. I'd teach her how to ride early so no one could ever catch her." You'd be good at that, he said. She looked over at him. If I said I wanted that someday, not right away, but not far off either, would that trouble you? Victor reached for a length of wood from beside the hearth and placed it gently on the fire. It would give me something to build toward. Her hands paused at the loom. Then let's build it. He nodded once, slow and sure. We will. The flames danced in the grate, and the wind pressed against the cabin walls, but neither of them moved. They sat together in the glow, not touching, not speaking, but bound by something made real through quiet acts and shared ground. Outside, the first snow began to fall, thin, soft, and certain. By mid-December, the snow came steady and thick, blanketing the hills in silence. Smoke curled from the chimney each morning, and the path to the barn had to be shoveled anew before sunrise. Faye had taken to wearing one of Victor's older coats, the sleeves hemmed to fit her arms, and she moved through the drift with a rhythm that had become her own. Inside, the cabin had grown warmer in more ways than one. There were no declarations, no grand gestures, just the quiet constancy of two lives woven together. Victor had built a shelf by the hearth for her sewing things, and she had cleared space in the cupboard for his tobacco. Little things, but they held. One evening she sat by the table, her knees tucked beneath her, stitching a wool bonnet. Victor stood by the stove, turning the last of the elk meat in the pan. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked, her voice soft but without uncertainty. He stirred the pan, then set the spoon aside. "Not once. I used to think I'd want to see cities, see the ocean, but now I don't know what I'd do with all that noise." Victor leaned against the counter. "You'd listen for the quiet and miss it." She smiled, setting the bonnet aside. "There's a comfort in knowing the shape of a day before it begins." He crossed the room and sat beside her. "I like that shape better with you in it." She reached across the table and took his hand, calloused and warm. "Do you ever think about what kind of family you'd want?" Victor looked at their joined hands before answering. "One that holds, no matter the season. One that doesn't need to be big to be enough." Faye nodded. "I'd like to raise children who know how to be still, who don't have to run from anything." "They'll have that," he said, "because of you." That night they lay beside each other in the hush of the cabin, the fire burning low. Faye turned toward him in the dark and pressed her fingers to his chest. "I never thought I'd be safe," she said. "Not really. You are now," he whispered, "and you always will be." She rested her head against him, and his arm came around her without hesitation. The wind howled against the eaves, but inside the world was still. By spring, the pasture was green again. Victor had built a cradle from pine, sanding each edge smooth. Faye filled it with quilts she'd sewn from scraps of their old clothes. She'd taken to humming while she worked, tunes from her childhood that returned slowly and without warning. The child came in late May, just after a rainstorm that left the air smelling of lilac and earth. A girl, strong-lunged and dark-haired, born in the quiet of the night with Victor's steady hands and Faye's silent resolve bringing her into the world. They named her Clara, after the woman who had taught Faye to read, when she was a girl, a woman who once said every name should carry a bit of hope with it. Victor held the baby close, his hand nearly spanning her back, and looked at Faye with something steady and full in his gaze. "You've given me more than I ever thought I'd have," he said. Faye leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes damp but sure. "We gave it to each other." He kissed her hair, slow and certain. "You're my home, Faye." She closed her eyes. "And you're mine." The seasons turned again. Summer brought new fence posts and Clara's first laugh. Autumn followed with jars of preserved peaches lined up on the shelf, and evenings spent on the porch, the baby bundled between them. The cabin never grew large, but it didn't need to. It held every piece of what they'd built, trust earned through action, love that rooted deep and quiet, and the kind of peace neither of them had known before. And in that place, among the hills and the hush of Wyoming wind, they lived. Together. Always.